I'm Mark Hennick. This is So-Called Normal. Hey folks, welcome to So-Called Normal. I'm Mark Hennick. Today we have on the show Lee Thomas. I've wanted to talk to Lee for a while now. They're a mental health and LGBTQ speaker, and we had the opportunity to connect in, where were we? Dallas, Texas, for some reason. Lee is in Calgary. I'm in Toronto, and we met up, and it took us to go to Dallas together to meet up to have this conversation at a conference that we were attending of other health advocates, and we had a little contingent of mental health advocates as well. So this episode and a couple of others that we're going to be having were all recorded there on site at the Health E-Voices conference in Dallas, Texas. I love talking to Lee so much because they've got such a holistic and I think well-needed, somewhat challenging view of the mental health space. And we get into that a bit. You know, what does it mean to be a mental health advocate? And especially, you know, asking yourself the question, asking others the question, what are you advocating for? Because not all advocacy is super helpful. Sometimes we encounter people who are advocating for things that we may not agree with, or we may not see as beneficial to the cause. And that's challenging too, to take care of yourself as an advocate. So we just scratched the surface of all those little themes. So stay tuned for the whole conversation. It's really a good one all the way through. I really enjoyed talking to Lee. So here's my conversation on So-Called Normal with Lee Thomas.
I am Lee Thomas. I'm a mental health advocate. I'm also a grad student. I'm doing my master's in social work right now. I've been doing a lot of advocacy around youth mental health, and I'm only now starting to shift that into being about mental health more generally. I'm 25 now, and so I'm not really a youth anymore. Depending who you ask, there's all these youth definitions going up to 30, and I'm not.
Yeah. After I started having kids and getting grays, and
you're like, I feel weird being a youth now. Yeah,
creaking and groaning when I get out of bed. It's like, it's probably we can give up this youth.
Yeah, it's like kind of once I started paying my own taxes, I was I really, if this feels weird, to be lumped in 11 to 29, I'm like, it's a bit broad. Yeah.
So you said you've been broadening out to talk about mental health more generally, but let's talk about the specifics for a minute. Why did you get into this in the first place? Why do you advocate?
Goodness. Yeah. So I grew up in a very small town in northern Alberta. So a little town called Whitecourt. We're most famous because a guy was walking his dog in the woods outside of Tim Hortons, and a mountain lion jumped out of a tree and attacked his dog. Oh. And so he punched it in the face.
Oh, good.
And the headline was "Man Punches Cougar at Tim Hortons." And that's what my hometown is famous for. Right. So we're Googleable. The man was not from Whitecourt. The cougar was. We'll take it. And so growing up, no one talked about mental health. Sure. It was just very much, it wasn't even we didn't have conversations we don't talk about this. Right. We just
didn't
learned by not talking about it.
So what's the population of that town?
Pretty small? When I was growing up, probably about 7,000 people.
Okay, yeah, so pretty small.
Yeah, but biggest town for 200 kilometers in any direction, right? Biggest town until you hit Edmonton.
Yeah.
So we thought of ourselves, we were real mad we weren't a city. Yeah. We thought we were entitled to it.
So you're saying, and this is how I grew up in Cape Breton, and Sydney in particular, which was a bit bigger than that. It was about 25,000, I think. But even still, it just wasn't the culture of our family. It's not that it was frowned on, although it was. It's just that nobody talked about it, right?
Yeah, and I feel it's hard to, it's kind of like when you learn something, you're like, wow, I never would have learned that if someone hadn't told me it, because it would never even occur to me that that's something I could Google or something I could look into. Right. You know what I mean? It's hard to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so growing up, and it's no one talks about this, but I'm not even aware that no one talks about it.
What about your family, your parents, your siblings?
So my parents are both teachers, and I'm the youngest of three, which explains all of my attention-seeking habits.
If you believe in that birth order stuff. I also happen to be the youngest of three.
Oh, shocking. It's shocking.
Yeah.
And so they are very stiff upper lip kind of people. My mom was born in Scotland, and my dad was raised Irish Catholic.
Yes.
So we're not a real feelingsy sort of family.
Right. We have a lot in common that I didn't realize.
Like, oh God,
yeah. So I get the Irish Catholic thing, the Scottish thing in Cape Breton. Like, wow.
Oh, yeah. And so my family, even to this day, we're very good at talking about like factual things, but not very much emotional things.
Yeah.
So like my partner, Caroline, and I broke up a couple months ago. And like I would have no problem like calling them and be like, Caroline and I broke up. But I would never call them ahead of time and say like, Caroline and I are like having... like there's some tension there and can I talk to you about it and like suss this out with you? That would be super weird. My parents would be like, what the hell?
If it was a boy, would that be okay, do you think?
No, I don't think it's like an LGBTQ thing. No. I think it's just more like that emotional side of thing. Right. Like it's not our wheelhouse. Right. Even with mental health, like I think there's still a vulnerability around talking about mental health, and my parents know what I do. I've actually presented at the school that I went to and the school that they teach at.
Oh, interesting. How was that? It's always weird, I find, going back to the homeland.
Super weird, especially because like at that point I would have been, I don't know, maybe 5 years out from when I graduated high school. Right. So there was like a lot of teachers there who still knew me. There was like some of my like friends' younger siblings were still going to the school. It was like super weird, especially because like I very much changed everything about myself once I left Whitecourt. Like, you know, cut my hair, changed my name. It's like a real Mulan move. Right.
Find yourself, all that stuff.
You know, moved across the country. And so coming back, they was like, oh, like Colleen Thomas. And I was like, who the fuck is that?
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So what motivated that? Were you struggling with your original
very much
identity?
So. Yeah. So I started struggling with like, I'd say like mental health generally in middle school. So I would have been like 11 or 12. And then didn't really I kind of flew under the radar until university. So I was like struggling with an eating disorder, struggling with self-harm, depression, but in a very stereotypical fashion, which makes me mad because I like to think that I'm special and like a statistical exception. But in a very statistically average sort of way, I kind of flew under the radar because I got good grades and didn't have too many outbursts.
Right. You did it the Irish Catholic way.
I did the Irish Catholic way, right? I was like guilty and sad and like took it out on myself.
Life is hard. It's hard for everybody.
Exactly. Like I'm like, is everyone not this miserable? Right. And I grew up in like, you know, like the emo age, right? So I'm listening to like My Chemical Romance and I'm like, this is just a normal way to feel. Like everyone wants to die. This is fine.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. So then I was still very unhappy, moved to New Brunswick. I wrestled all through middle school and high school. I was very good at it. And I moved to UNB or to Fredericton to go to UNB and wrestle, and then wrestled for my first year university, stopped doing that, and then decided to get some mental health help. Were those two things related or why? Yeah, because a big chunk of my struggle was eating disorder stuff, and wrestling is a very weight-centered sport.
Sure. Yeah.
So you can get away with a lot of, maybe get away with is not the right word, but you can engage in a lot of really disordered behaviors and people won't flag it because it's like dedication to the sport, right? Like if I didn't eat for a couple days, I didn't need to keep that a secret almost ever because it was like, yes, dedication to my sport.
Right.
Kind of
yeah. It's almost like the CEO with bipolar disorder who's super productive when they're manic.
And it's not seen as a bad thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Because you happen to find a community. And I think we're attracted to communities. Of course, that's what we do as humans, that make us feel good about whatever it is that we're doing, even if what we're doing isn't necessarily good for us.
And like, I know there's this biological aspect to mental health. Like I get that, but I think there is this huge social aspect to it too that sometimes these conversations around biology miss a little bit. So, you know, what we see as a symptom is socially constructed in a lot of ways. So I was able to engage in a lot of these behaviors and have it be very socially endorsed, partly because I was like always a very chubby kid. Right. And so, you know, if I'm weighing my food and, you know, exercising all the time, people see that as like self-discipline and self-improvement. Or because I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder much later, but I teach mental health first aid, and they talk a lot about, you know, work as a measure of wellness. And I always problematize that a little bit in my presentations. Because when I was really sick with my bipolar disorder, I was, you know, a very productive, very manic employee. It
turns out you don't sleep for 18 hours.
I know, I was like, wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, was getting all of my self-worth from my work. Yeah. And now that I'm healthier, I'm a much worse employee because I'm like, I'm sorry, it's 4:30. I'd like to leave now unless you want to pay me overtime, right? Like I have that healthier work-life balance, but it's Employers don't like that as much.
I don't think that makes you a worse employee. I think it makes you're taking care of yourself.
Depends who you ask. You're not a good capitalist, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody would accuse you of being a capitalist anyway.
No.
So okay, you're in college and the wheels fall off, basically, is what you're telling me.
Yeah. So with, and again, very stereotypical story, like with eating disorders and like, the self-harm and the mood disorder kind of all coming to a head and lack of parental supervision. And I was living in residence, big kind of party culture. Residence meal hall was like not great for me because it was like unlimited food and no supervision. And I was living in an all girls residence at the time, and some other people on my floor also had eating disorders, and we didn't have the healthiest relationship with that and each other. Like we were great friends, but not great supporters of each other.
It's a weird environment, isn't it? Especially for first year students. I only realize this now as I keep saying as I get older. I'm only in my early 30s, but even still.
I just imagine you stroking like a long white beard.
Yeah.
That,
in
like
my day.
a pipe.
No, but as I get older, I realize how young I was in first year, second year university. Like you're still a kid. You're straight out of high school. And nobody taught me how to, most people had to do that, right?
Yeah.
You're just thrown out there.
And it's just kind of like, good luck, kids. And for me, it was overall a very positive experience.
Yeah, me too.
It was an opportunity when I needed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of just kind of like, well, good luck out there. Like, figure it out. Yeah. And I think just a lot of assumptions of, again, that whole society thing. Like, what do we see as normal rites of passage? Right?
Yeah. And do you think that it's still generally or was at the time seen as a normal rite of passage to struggle with depression in this way or whatever the struggle was?
I feel like more it was seen as like a normal rite of passage to be very profoundly unhappy. And that's where I think I struggled was I was aware that I was unhappy, but I didn't think that I was like struggling with a mental illness because I think maybe in the early days of people starting to raise awareness about mental health and mental illness, but there was, and I think still is very much this vibe of like, you have all these fakers out there who are making it harder for everyone, people who say they have anxiety and depression and they don't, and they're just making it way harder for the people who actually do struggle. And I thought I was a faker.
Yeah,
I did.
I think that piece seems to be new, but people don't realize that this whole mental health awareness thing hasn't been around all that long. It's been 5-10 years that we've been doing it in a really profound and an intentional way, I think. Yeah. But it hasn't really fully sunk in yet either.
No, and I think we're just starting to get to the point where we can have those more nuanced conversations around things. Like I was having a great conversation with someone yesterday where you have these arguments about like, I don't want people to see me as an illness. I want people to see me as a person. And then you have people who, have this idea of like, well, my illness does impact every single part of who I am. Like, I'm not defined by it, but it actually 100% influences every single thing about me.
Right.
And so it's trying to balance that, like, I don't want people to only see me as someone with a mental illness or, someone who's trans or someone who's like whatever. Like, I want them, so I don't want them to only see that, but I also don't want them to like see around that, right? Like, I don't want them to be like, I don't see you as like a mentally ill person. I just see you as a person. Because it's like, well, I don't want you to unsee this huge influential part of me.
Yeah. I don't know if you've reflected on this, but how much stigma at that point in your life had you internalized that you believed a lot? Like what if you're a mentally ill person? Like, what does that mean?
Bucket loads, right? Yeah. And I always struggle with this idea of, do these small steps make it harder for us to take big steps? So
what do you mean by that?
I'm thinking in like, say in the LGBTQ community, we've done a lot of advocacy work around like, and when I say we, I don't mean like me personally.
Well, you have.
But like not in this particular way. But there's like all these like campaigns around like, like not all gay people are, say we could talk about gay men. Not all gay men are flamboyant and not all gay men are feminine and not all gay men, want to be fashion designers or like whatever. Right. Which like I get that because you want to expand the box that people can live in. But there is still this subtext of like, I'm sorry, as being a flamboyant feminine fashion designer, like something bad.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think we see that with, say, mental health initiatives where it's like, well, not everyone with a mental illness, is X, Y, and Z. Right. And some things are like objectively bad. You're like, okay, like not everyone with a mental illness is a serial killer. Like that's an objectively bad thing to be.
Sure.
But I feel like there is still this, subtext of we want to avoid all the kind of icky things, like this whole idea of, you see these campaigns around mental health and addiction. And I think my definition, one of my campaigns kind of fed into this a little bit. This idea of, mentally ill people aren't these people you see on the street and people who are talking to themselves. It's normal people like you and me who live with mental illness.
And as a result, we forget about the people who are living on the street.
And I was like, and even if it was only, people who are living in the street or whoever, like, I'm sorry, does that make it less of an important issue? Yeah. And so that's part of the reason, like, I've taken a bit of a step back with the My Definition campaign part, like, because it's like very time consuming and it doesn't necessarily fit with my politics anymore. And that was part of it was I was like, I don't want to be reinforcing these messages that there's like a right way to have a mental illness.
Had you thought about featuring people who fit those stereotypes?
It's not something because I mostly would like go with university populations because that's like where I was at the time. I was also a university student. Yeah. And I think for me, it was less about, okay, I want to make this campaign something that does fit with my politics and more about like, this campaign was never as radical as I wanted it to be. So I'm not going to try to like squeeze it into something radical. I'm just going to go, you know what, that served the purpose I needed it to serve. And it's okay for me to move on to something else. Yeah. So like with my writing, I get to be a bit more radical.
Yeah. And how has that been evolving for you in terms of shifting how you do advocacy? Was that hard for you? Sometimes people really want to cling to what they've always done.
Yeah. I feel like I've never had that sense of like permanency. No. So for me, it's like, I'm like, not sad that My Definition isn't a huge part of my life. I always wanted it to kind of work itself out. You know what I mean? Like I even from the very beginning, I was like, I want My Definition to get to a point where it's like not seen as necessary anymore. Right. What I've struggled with more is as my advocacy has become a bit more radical and become, honestly, I think a bit more meaningful to me, people don't want to hear it as much.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, the more marginal you get. And I think this is why, in many ways, mental health awareness has become so popular is because it's been neutered. Because it's been sanitized. It's about self-care and these are great things. Self-care is important, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And sometimes it's actually often messy and uncomfortable and challenging.
Like self-care is such a good example of like so individualized, right? Like if I am struggling with my mental health because I can't afford my medications and because I'm facing discrimination and because of, X, Y, and Z, like me doing self-care, yes, it's not a bad thing for me to do. But if we're yelling at me to do self-care, why are we not yelling at my landlord to lower my rent and yelling at, the school system to stop being like messed up? You know what I mean? Like, why is it on me?
Yeah. I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but I certainly have. And I've talked about this. I've been criticized for this, that the pendulum in the mental health advocacy world in a very short time has swung really hard back to the biomedical, take your meds, see your psychiatrist, and then you'll be cured and get all better. Yeah. Or even on the dark side of that, some people just can't be cured because their brain is broken and they're fundamentally different in some way. That makes me really uncomfortable as I think a broader minded person. Have you noticed that as well?
I definitely have seen the pendulum swing. Well, I feel like I kind of jumped on when the pendulum was still swinging very biologically. And I struggled with this because for a while, the biological model I found very comforting.
Sure. It's simple, right?
I loved the idea of like, I was just sick and there was like a point in my DNA where this was inevitable. It helped me like really shift some of the blame. Yeah. But I also see the dangers of it and I don't super buy into it anymore.
Well, I mean, I think it took me a long time. I had many medications that made me worse and I eventually found one that worked for me well enough. But I don't attribute much of my recovery to that. It helped stabilize me, sure, but that's not what caused my recovery.
Yeah, and I still take medications. I find them very useful, but I feel like it's again that individual thing, right? If you as an individual have it in your DNA or in, whatever chemicals are going on in your body, we don't need to look at like how messed up our society is, right? Like because then it's a Mark problem or then it's a Lee problem. Absolutely. It's not. It's there was a presentation that I spoke on a long time ago at Dal, and not me, one of the other people, but I'm going to steal it right now, said, if all the frogs in the pond are sick, you should look at the pond. But we're looking at each individual frog and being like, what's wrong with this frog? Yeah. And that was specifically, they were talking like post-secondary, but I keep hearing all these conversations around, the epidemic of anxiety that's sweeping our schools and what's wrong with our children. And I'm like, I feel like maybe we shouldn't be looking at all these individual kids. And instead we should be like, wow, we're, there's this pressure cooker of society that we've got going on, and
what are the other
do something
factors
about that?
I also find, I think as many people have probably noticed that there's little more dangerous than giving people a little bit of information about something, because then they're going to take it either way too far or misinterpret it. And I find this is the case with basic neuroscience information as well, that there's, especially in the advocacy community, I've noticed, people who will bang the drum about it's your brain, the problem is your brain, but they don't actually seem to really fundamentally understand much about the brain, about how neuroplasticity works and how our environment, if you're poor, if you're racialized, if you're marginalized in any way, the impact that trauma has on your brain, that just because we have pictures of somebody's brain who looks different, who has depression, that doesn't mean that's what caused their depression. It actually could have went the other way around. So people don't seem to understand the scientific part of it, right?
Yeah. And it's, again, I always try to like pull out in my brain like these unspoken things. So with that, if it's like, okay, well, it's, your brain is sick, let's say, is the kind of unspoken foundation still that, okay, if we couldn't pinpoint a structural chemical thing in your brain, then it would somehow be your fault and you should just pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right.
It's kind of like if we look at like LGBTQ stuff where I keep drawing parallels. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. That's a good marker of wisdom, I think, that I've seen. It is.
Wise, quote Mark Hennick, Lee Thomas. I'll add you as one of my references to my resume.
Put it on the back of your book cover when you write one.
Exactly.
Wise.
But like, with LGBTQ stuff, there's all these people saying, oh, well, you're born this way. You can see that like a trans man's brain is the same as a cis man's brain. And so trans men actually aren't women or whatever it is, like, which is great in some ways because it, buys us that respect or that access that we need. But when people say like, oh, well, being gay isn't a choice or being trans isn't a choice, I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. But even if it was a choice, like that doesn't mean that I shouldn't have rights. You know what I mean?
So can I ask you about this? Because this is one of those things that I've thought about, but because I'm not a member of the LGBTQ community, I haven't felt that it's at all in any way my role to actually speak on this point because I'm not qualified. But I've often asked myself the question when I've heard that tagline, born this way, what if it? Why can't you just choose? Say it was. What's wrong with that? Why can't you just choose to be gay if you want to?
But I guess
what's the difference?
Right, because I'm like I was like, you also grew up in a small town. Because for me, like even growing up gay in a small town, the idea that it wasn't my choice, that this was just a biological predisposition, it helped me shift some of that shame and blame. And that's where I get like hung up because I'm like, I know for me, it helped me shift that shame and blame at the beginning.
Right.
But then when I got older, I was kind of like, oh, like that's still operating within the parameters of like, if it was a choice, you would choose differently.
Right.
So there is still that like underlying shame in it for me.
Yeah.
So I don't super love those born this way narratives.
Right.
But then I struggle with, if I didn't have that 5 years ago, would I be where I am now?
Right.
Or maybe if I didn't have that 5 years ago, I'd be where I am now way sooner.
Yeah, and that's like when we were starting to talk about the biological determinants of mental health, I very much feel like that serves the same function too, that it's an entry point for people because it's simplistic. I mean, we found out a long time ago that the chemical imbalance model never actually had very much evidence, but it's easy. And that's when I was first diagnosed. I sat in front of a social worker who pulled out her whiteboard and her little red dry erase marker. She drew 2 neurons, little trees. She showed me the little balls of neurotransmitters that go between them, serotonin, and I needed more of those little balls. That's what she told me. Because it was easy.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if it was accurate. It was easy. And that was, I guess, what I needed at the time. It did help. So I think maybe all of these narratives serve a purpose for a time. And then we have to let them go and move on.
Yeah. I just worry that there are people who never learn the next step. That's where I guess, again, like in the gay community, I've been calling it the gay marriage effect, which I don't know if that's like me being disrespectful. But I feel like, the queer community really banded together and was like, gay marriage is a cause that's very important to us. And this is this tiny little step, this tiny little, very palatable step. Let's please make this happen. And then, we got gay marriage. Fabulous, awesome, love it, really important, gave people a lot of access to things that they should have access to. And then now it's kind of held up as like, well, we don't need all this like trans rights stuff. We don't need all this like other weird queer shit that's happening because you have gay marriage, so stop complaining.
Right.
And so yes, it's progress, but it almost feels like it's now being used as like an impediment to further progress.
Right.
And so I worry about that with like various other things where when we soften the system a little bit, people use that as a way to say, like, see, the system's not all that bad.
Right.
Like, I don't want, like if we look at the prison system, like it's great if we're housing, trans women with women and trans men with men and like recognizing and affirming that gender identity. Like that's great. It's better than not doing that.
Sure.
But I don't want people to think that makes, the disproportionate incarceration of trans people an okay thing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So I worry about it being held up as like, oh, it's fine now.
Sure. This happens in the psychiatric treatment community all the time, especially now the last few years where, especially wealthy donors are giving millions and millions of dollars to psychiatric hospitals to inspire hope and to promote recovery and all this stuff. And they get great glossy campaigns and they build new buildings that have lots of glass and swooping corners and all this stuff. But then if you actually go visit, the treatment conditions are not much different, right? And I experienced this about 2 years ago when I was rehospitalized for the first time in about 15 years. And I thought going in there, I brought myself in prior to any immediate risk because I just recognized that I was past my typical coping. And I went in thinking, surely after all this work, here's my ego that I've been doing and that everybody else has been, surely it has to be better. I mean, I've seen the glossy pictures and the brochures and the nice new sign out front on the street. And I went in and it was a hellhole. Yeah. They had the straps ready to go on the stretchers in case they had to restrain people. The kid in the next room was screaming that they tied him down and gave him his needle, just like it used to be, right? It's a locked ward within a locked ward within a locked unit.
In a basement.
And it's in a basement. Like it was
I took
terrible.
a guess.
Yeah, no, you were right. It was terrible. So people don't realize, and I often wonder if you're going to donate, not to say don't donate money to a hospital or something, like do it if that makes you feel good, and it does probably help. But also maybe go visit and see what it's like and what your money is buying.
And that's where I worry about, I struggle with this because I don't want anyone to think that their mental health is less important or not severe enough or whatever, because I know that those narratives were very toxic for me, that whole idea of I'm not sick enough to deserve help and blah, blah, blah. So I would in no way ever want to feed into that. But I sometimes worry that our face of mental health and mental illness has become too palatable.
Airbrush celebrities.
And there's not, like, I think it's great that celebrities or, or very privileged people or very articulate people or whoever, like, I think it's great that they're speaking about their mental illness. But I even think that, like, when I go into a school and speak, I'm like, oh boy, like I have tons of privileges. And if I didn't have them, they would not let me speak to these children. Right. Like I want people to really think about, like, why do you guys feel comfortable hearing this from me? Why am I being paid to be on this stage when you don't want to hear it from someone else? What is it about me that makes you feel like you can let your guard down and listen? Right.
Well, I think that's almost, that's very much a responsibility of the advocate too, is first of all, get over yourself and realize that your privilege and realize how fortunate you are to be doing that. Also to recognize that you're not representing an entire community, you're representing your own experience. But then the great responsibility that comes with that they gave you the privilege to do that for all kinds of unfair reasons. So you better wield that appropriately.
Yeah,
right?
but I know I like personally live in fear of being like weaponized against someone else. Like I would never, because there are these narratives of like, okay, I have bipolar disorder and I can do whatever I want with my life, which is great because I would never want to be like, oh, I'm being, and I am being limited in certain ways by it. But like generally, if I really decided I wanted to do X, Y, and Z, I'm sure I could pretty much do it.
Right.
But I would never want someone else to be like, oh, Lee has bipolar disorder and can do this, therefore I need to be able to do it as well. Right. Like, and I think that there's that temptation for people to do that with all sorts of marginalizations, not just.
I think like anything else, I think there is some good to that in terms of you being an inspiration for others, as I hope many advocates and people who share their stories are, that recovery is not only possible, as we say, it's actually likely if you get the help that you need, if you can surround yourself with the right supports. And sometimes I think it is helpful for people to see somebody who's made it. Actually, often it's helpful for people to see somebody who's made it through and then think to themselves, maybe I can do that too, right? I think it can become dangerous when you overinvest in that so much that you don't actually do what's right for you, right?
Yeah.
Because recovery happens differently for everybody.
Yeah. And I guess I always want to be mindful of just like the sheer amount of luck that went into me being able to like, and even just, again, that whole social idea of like, what does it mean for me to have achieved success? What does it mean for me to inspire others?
Good point, yeah.
Like if I had, done like a double middle finger and been like, fuck you, mental health system, I'm out. And I'm going to be like writing angry, maybe like not super clear editorials, on WordPress for the rest of my life, as opposed to writing slightly more clear editorials on WordPress. If I was encouraging people to never, ever engage with the mental health system instead of to engage with it in a way that makes sense for them, why does that necessarily mean that I'm less successful?
Well, and
you know what I mean?
I don't think it does. And you're right. Success is a relative term. And that was the most common way to do mental health advocacy in the generation prior to ours in the anti-psychiatric movement, which was very much, and there's still a few of them around, though you almost never hear about it because of the pendulum, I think. That's very much what it was. It seemed to be people talking about how not only were their rights violated by the system, but they were abused and denigrated and traumatized by the system in horrible ways. Yeah. And I think we forget that, right? And
it's very interesting to me because I know I worked with a lot of, in New Brunswick, the consumer survivor kind of like movement and that sort of thing. And it's such a different context because the older mental health advocates I was working with, and I'm not even sure they would call themselves mental health advocates.
No, I don't think they would. Yeah.
But they were very much, being hospitalized is a violation of your rights and all that sort of stuff. And I think that is true in their experience, but then I'm working with these younger mental health advocates and, even people my age or our age. And I know for us, like being able to access inpatient care was nearly impossible. Yeah. So our worry was not, oh no, I'm going to get hospitalized and held there for a really long time and hate it.
Right.
Our worry was,
won't.
And that was basically it, was that idea of I'm going to desperately need care and never ever be able to access it.
Right. And again, this is where people get stuck on one thing instead of seeing the diversity of what people need.
Yeah.
The conversation is always around, why don't we have enough psychiatrists? Yes, there's communities that have absolutely tragic lack of psychiatry, but psychiatrists aren't the only people who can help people either. They actually tend to be a very expensive form of helping relatively few people, and they need to be used appropriately. They need to be part of the system, but used appropriately. So that's not going to, like, if you're investing all of your efforts in that one thing, you're not going to see much of a result from it.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense with the biological model, right? We have so many sick individuals. Yes. Let's get so many individual doctors to help them.
More beds, more inpatient
more individual
rooms.
Treatments, right? As opposed to seeing it as that more social problem. But it's, as much as it's expensive to hire 10 psychiatrists, it's much more expensive to provide social housing for people or whatever else they might need, right?
You would think so, but actually, are you familiar with the Mental Health Commission of Canada Housing First Research Project?
I'm listening.
Yeah, so they had this bold idea. It wasn't original. It had been tested elsewhere, that if you take people with mental illnesses who are also homeless, often that would be an exclusionary factor for social housing. If they had, for example, severe and persistent schizophrenia, they might not be eligible for housing. But if you actually took them and gave them a house first, that helped their mental illness. And the recovery rates were much higher. Right, shocking. Take homeless people and give them a house, and that helps their homelessness and their mental illness.
Yeah.
And the research on this has been conclusive, that it saves on the back end far more than it actually costs to do, because they're not using police as much, they're not using shelters as much, hospitals and doctors as much, because they have somewhere to live and a safe place to sleep, and they don't have to worry about where they're going to eat the next day or if they're going to get stabbed in the bathroom. So these kinds of interventions do work, and we do have data to support it.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, where I get hung, because, doing this grad school academia nonsense right now, that's where I get hung up, where we do have this data. Yeah. And so why is every provincial government not jumping on board with this, right?
Great question.
And that's where I get really frustrated, where I know we have like these, and not with like any one individual, like I've got no beef with the Mental Health Commission, we have this research and then it doesn't get translated into actionable change. And
they would share that frustration, I think.
Yeah, and I just find that so wildly frustrating. And I can't quite, I keep staring at the gap and being like, what the hell is happening there? And not really being able to fully figure it out.
I think you're probably in lockstep with the entire mental health community. It's like, we know this isn't a mystery. Or likewise with treatment and recovery. There's 100 years almost of research on treatments that actually do really help people that people still aren't getting access to. Mm-hmm. Something as basic and thoroughly researched as cognitive behavioral therapy. Not only is it not funded, generally speaking, anywhere in Canada in terms of the type of ongoing treatment that people need or access to that treatment, people don't even know about it still very often. And it's the gold standard in treatment for anxiety disorders, and it works. So why not invest more heavily in that? And we've known about it for so long.
Yeah. And that's where I get pretty hung up on that. And that's where I feel like some of my hope slipping away. You know what I mean? And I always try to keep that balance of like, I want to be jaded enough to understand how the system works,
yes,
but hopeful enough that I still think it can change in a meaningful way. And when I think about that, sometimes I like feel that hopefulness part slipping away and that jaded part creeping up on me, being like, you're not the first person to notice this and you're not going to be the last. And like, this shit isn't changing.
Yeah. I don't have to tell you this, but fight the jadedness. Like because, survivors, consumers, people with lived experience, whatever we call ourselves now, we change it every 5 or 10 years. We consistently have ranked healthcare providers as among the most stigmatizing part of the system, doctors and especially inpatient healthcare providers. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that because I've experienced that myself too. And I think it's that they see it every day. They get used to it. They see people not recovering because the system isn't serving them. The system often makes them worse. And they see it every single day and they become jaded and hopeless. And then they pass that on to others. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do that. I'm not saying that you are. But like you can choose not to be that. You can choose to be hopeful.
But I also try to balance it out with what I see is sometimes people who don't work within the system have this naiveness to them where there is this idea, well, if only people know where the gaps are, something will happen about it. And I think that you see that in a lot of, like, I'm sure I did that when I was like a fresh advocate or, people who aren't working in this system every day who are like, oh my goodness, when people learn that this is how things work, there will be riots in the street and this stuff is going to change. And that doesn't happen.
And that's where we see that stigma against mental health problems and illnesses and the treatment thereof. It's still rampant. Like we're talking, sure, but it hasn't really sunk much deeper than that yet.
Mm-hmm. And it's again, who gets to talk about it without it being further stigmatized, right? Like I worry about that now with working in youth mental health and with youth advocates, where because I would have started advocating at 19-ish.
So let's go back there for a second and tell me about that. You were still struggling with the wrestling. What changed to get you into advocacy at that time?
So summer of 2012, summer after my first year of university, I got really, really, really sick. I was living like fully alone. There was no one else in the residence building. I was doing what's called summer monitoring. So you live in a residence building and make sure it doesn't burn down. And I was like really engaging in eating disorder behaviors, like just a very, very unsafe amount. Not that there is a safe amount to engage in, but you know what I mean? Like I was in pretty significant physical risk as well as like obviously emotional, mental risk. So I got really sick and I wanted there to be like, I think I had a very romanticized idea of mental health in my brain because I had finally at that point admitted that I had an eating disorder. I was like, okay, I'm like engaging in these behaviors a lot. This is probably like something bad. But again, like I was still like a relatively chubby person, like compared to my idea of what someone with an eating disorder was.
So were you, how did your eating disorder manifest?
So I had like really bad bulimia, really bad. There's no good bulimia. No, exactly.
But, just the right amount
just like
of bulimia.
The perfect amount. So I was like binging and purging very, very regularly, like multiple times a day, which is a real expensive situation to be in as well. But I was like, it was like my whole life was just around food.
And was it your relationship to food, you think, or was there something else going on? What was?
I mean, we see a lot of eating disorders with trans people.
Okay.
I wouldn't have been able to articulate that at the time. It's kind of retrospectively, I've been like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Why is that? Do you know?
I think it's this effort to control your body a little bit. I think there's like something very biologically comforting about food. So like you eat food and feel comforted. And then for me, it was like, oh shit, I got to get rid of this. I remember reading somewhere about the difference between anorexia and bulimia being that like people with anorexia generally really want control and people with bulimia are almost like the bigger part is more like self-loathing and self-punishment.
Right.
which that held with my experience because I keep
the Irish Catholic thing.
Yeah.
It keeps coming full circle.
I couldn't find someone to flog me in the streets. So, or like, I don't know, those like, those like punishment-y things.
Yeah,
like I'm holding my arms up. I'm like, the gallows. Yeah. And so it was, I think probably because I had like, not a super deep emotional range as well. It was something tangible and visceral,
right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's also like I've had my eating disorder since I was like 11 or 12. Okay. So it's hard for me to kind of like, I don't have a lot of memories from when I was 10. Sure. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's been a part of my life for so long that at that point, so I would have been 18 at that point. So 6 or 7 years, like I couldn't really remember a way of functioning in the world without it.
Right.
And
it was
in a lot
normal
of ways, it was
for you.
Soothing.
Sure.
Right. Because because I also have like, pretty intense anxiety and lots of other fun stuff. And so I would, go have a social interaction or whatever. And I've never been a very shy person, shockingly, right. But I have like this like highlight reel that's constantly playing. So, I'll leave a situation. Like we'll be having a great time. I'll be chatting with Mark Hennick, having like just a ball. And about 5 minutes after the show, and someone will be like, what the fuck? Like Mark was sitting there thinking like, when's Lee going to shut the fuck up? Like being like, oh my God. Like, you know what I mean?
I'm not, so we can clear that up right away.
But it's a constant replay. Yeah. And so for me, the binging and purging and the self-harm and it was all kind of tied together, but it was so comforting because it was like, it doesn't matter how much that person hates me because I hate me more.
Yeah.
And that was like, it was like a security blanket.
In my case, the depression and the suicidality served a purpose. Oh, yeah. That the eating disorder, whatever, the OCD, the bipolar disorder, it might be maladaptive to people outside of your head, but in your head, you're trying your best to adapt to something, whatever that is, right?
Oh, I was on the phone with a friend pretty recently, and we were just talking about how they were like really kind of struggling with some stuff. And I don't remember exactly how it came up, but I basically brought up the idea that like, because I've had like suicidal thoughts as long as I can really remember, which again is why I kind of thought they were normal.
Yeah.
And I was like, I find that very comforting. And I still do to this day where I'm like, if things get bad enough in my life, I can always kill myself. Yeah. And yes, that's probably a very maladaptive technique, but I find it very, because it's like knowing that the option is there makes me not necessarily want to engage with it.
Right. Yeah.
But I think if I was like, there's no other way out, I have to go through it, then it doesn't feel like a choice anymore. And then you feel trapped. And I think feeling trapped is a very dangerous thing, like when it comes to suicide.
Yeah.
And
I think that seems to be at the core of suicidality.
And so I mentioned that to my friend and they were like, no one has ever said that to me. And they were like bawling their eyes out. They were like, that makes so much sense. Like, and it was that whole, they had felt so embarrassed and so ashamed that was comforting to them. And I was like, we all do what we got to do to like feel comforted.
Just trying to get by. Yeah.
And to me, like, I find that very soothing, kind of in the same way that some people find nihilism very distressing. Right. And I find it very comforting where I'm like, 100 years from now, no one's ever going to remember that I existed and I'm okay with that. And that's like relief to me. Whereas some people are like, oh shit. Yeah. I don't know what to do with that information.
Yeah, that's kind of me. But even though, I creep into it every now and then myself. But so at 19 though, you made a shift at some point into advocacy, right? So you were very symptomatic and now you're talking about it.
I was very lucky when I started, I don't know exactly what was going on at UNB Counseling Services, but when I started accessing them, they didn't have a limit. So I saw a counselor there, I would say once or twice a week for an entire summer.
Because you recognized stuff was getting out of hand.
Yeah. And because, I guess this goes back to the romanticized image where I really thought that eventually someone would like drag me kicking and screaming against my will. Right. And I thought that like if I voluntarily accessed any sort of help, that meant that I didn't deserve it. I was like, if I was truly sick, I would never access help. Right. But I just kind of got to a point where I was like, I am so sick of this shit. Like it was just that exhaustion. I was like, I'm so sick of like waking up with vomit in my hair every single day. This sucks. So called counseling services, kind of felt like, nothing left to lose. And kind of went from there, ended up getting diagnosed with like depression at first, then put on antidepressants. That's how we found out I had bipolar disorder. Right. So you put someone with bipolar disorder and antidepressants, they're either going to get much more manic or much more depressed. Right. And so I got really manic at first, but I'd been depressed for so long that I didn't realize I was manic. I just thought that's like what being happy felt like.
Right.
So I was like, wow, I can't believe I never realized what a brilliant and amazing person I am. Like, I can't
and how I'm going to be an astronaut.
Yeah,
and
like
Jesus.
I'm literally a rock star. It's unreal.
Yeah.
And then so we kind of like sussed that out. I felt very well supported at UNB. I like had a psychiatrist and a dietitian and a doctor and a counselor, and they were all kind of working together.
Yeah.
And it was really, really great. And then I graduated and they were like, here's your diploma. Good luck, kid.
Right.
And then I like
you're on your own.
didn't see a medical professional for 2.5 years. It was real bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, around the time I was 19, I started by posting on Facebook because, you know, millennial.
Yeah.
So I just like posted something about they were doing a awareness day for DOTS New Brunswick, which is an organization that I don't think exists anymore. I think it's been rolled into Partners for Youth. But it was just like an awareness thing. And so as much as I like kind of talk shit about awareness sometimes, I'm like, worked for me.
Yeah.
And so posted about it on Facebook and ended up getting kind of like all these messages about it. And all the messages kind of said like, you know, thanks for sharing your story. I have a story too, but like, don't tell anyone.
Right.
And I was like, it's so messed up that there's like so many people who want to feel heard and like want community and feel alone, but we're like not connecting with each other.
Yeah.
So I ran for the student union and decided to start the My Definition campaign through them. We put out a call on Facebook that said like, do you have a mental health story you want to share? Email us. And we're like, fuck, no one's going to reply. We didn't even have a name for the campaign yet. Like it was just like, we want to put your face on a poster.
Yeah.
And then 9 people emailed us. They became the first faces.
Wow. And that's how we first met, I think.
We hired you through the student union, actually.
Yeah.
You spoke at an event.
I did. I do remember the event. They don't all fade away after I'm done. But no, I remember. And I remember thinking for me too, because I went to St. Thomas, which is, you know, shares the hill with UNB. So to come back there and see that, and there's still a lot of work to do, of course, but you know, it was nice to see somebody finally doing something. Right?
And I'm like, I feel like very lucky. I know I've talked about luck a lot, but I was like, I just feel like I happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right experiences and the right skills, and it all kind of came together for me. Because you and I were joking about this before. I'm like, all I know how to do is be mentally ill and talk about it.
Yeah,
like those are my 2 skills.
And market the shit out of that skill.
Like, even then, like that's not as much my strength.
Yeah, I know. But so what, I mean, I know you're tight on time, so I don't want to keep you any longer. But if you could tell me through all this, you know, you get into advocacy and the rest is history, as they say, and all that. So a couple of years later now, down into the advocacy trenches, studying social work, really still, you know, a very bright future, whatever you choose to do. What have you learned so far along this process about yourself?
Oh, about myself.
Yeah.
That was the twist at the end. I was like, let me tell you what I've learned.
Well, you can tell me about that too, but I'm really more interested in learning more about what you've learned about yourself.
I've learned that I am a much better writer than I thought I was, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I guess that I was like, I feel like I've learned a lot of negative things about myself as well. Like, I feel like all this like insight has kind of stripped away some of these ideals I've held about myself. Like, I had always thought of myself as someone who was very good at being vulnerable. And then I realized that's just because I share stuff that I actually don't feel is that vulnerable, but other people tell me it's vulnerable, so I thought it was vulnerable. And then when I have moments for real vulnerability, I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't want to talk about that.
But now at least you have that awareness, right?
Yeah.
Of where the line is.
Yeah, and like learning about that introspection. And I know that there are people who like don't find that introspection as interesting as I do. But I feel like everything in my life is about trying to understand either what happened to me or what happened to other people. Like it's like my brain is always like trying to fix these puzzles or something. And I think like a lot of people, like I ended up going into this because I am not able to cope with the idea that what I went through was purposeless. Right. And like, I mean, my dad was raised Irish Catholic, but I was not. So I was like, I don't have like any purpose in my life.
Yeah.
And so I don't necessarily have like a lot of, I guess, like higher beliefs or that sort of thing. And so I think that's part of why I'm so fascinated about mental health is just this idea of like, wow, what I went through was really bad. and it can't be for no reason. Like, so if I can create a reason out of it, if I can create a purpose out of it, I find that comforting. So sometimes I think that I'm just like very selfish in the work that I do because I'm just constantly trying to figure out like what the fuck happened
Seeking
there.
purpose. So are you at a place yet where you're able to say that your struggle has had purpose?
I think it's had purpose in it's funny because I like to think very systemically, and that's where I lose that feeling of purpose because it's just this huge system that like refuses to move. But when I think individually, when I think of like the individual people who I've got to meet, the individual people who have like told me that the work that I do has helped them and been meaningful to them, that's where I find that feeling of purpose. So every nice thing that anyone has ever sent me on like Facebook Messenger or email or whatever, it's like printed out, it's on my wall. I look like a crazy person with all like these printouts on my wall. And then I was like, well, I am. So
with red Sharpie connecting them and making circles.
And I just I can't imagine, like, I was like, I don't know what I was doing before this. Like, I was like, I've always wanted to help people. I wanted to go into journalism, but I didn't know that Stu existed.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah,
so
nobody
I
does.
went to UNB to like take English because I was like, that's basically journalism.
Yeah.
And, I started with the student newspaper because I was like, I really want to write about problems so like people will like know about them and fix them. And then I kept writing about problems and no one was fixing them. And that's why I ran for the student union. It was a platform of mental health and gender neutral washrooms. Those are my like two.
And it worked.
Platform. They also now have gender neutral washrooms.
There you go.
And so then it was, okay, well, I'm going to do this because this will make it work. And now I'm kind of doing the advocacy thing because maybe that will make a difference. And, if I decide tomorrow or 5 years from now that this is not like the right way to make that difference for people, then I'll do something else.
I look forward to seeing everything that you do because it's so much fun. And you will, and I will be reading about it. And it's such a pleasure to have talked to you and to see all the good work that you're doing. I really think that this clearly is your purpose. You're using it well, and I think you're making a bigger difference than you think you're making.
Aw, thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, that's it for me and Lee, or Lee and I, or Lee and me, whatever the formulation is. Anyway, it doesn't matter because Lee is amazing. Check out their work at leethomas.ca or on Facebook as well. It's not hard to find Lee, and the work on LGBTQ and trans in particular mental health issues is really inspiring and I think needed, fills a space that's desperately needed in the mental health conversation. So I want to thank Lee for coming on the show and for educating me certainly more on those issues. If you like this conversation and all the others that we have on here trying to figure out what the hell it means to be so-called normal, head over to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. Leave us a rating at the bottom, leave a comment, share it with your friends and family. Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the show. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever. I'm everywhere. At Mark Hennick, at MarkHennick, or you can go over to markhennick.com for more about me there. If you want to try out some free psychotherapy, a free trial of psychotherapy, go over to betterhelp.com/Mark, enter the promo code Mark, and you can get some virtual psychotherapy with your phone, wherever you are, whenever works for you. Safely with credentialed, well-trained, thoroughly screened psychotherapists. Sometimes people are nervous about doing online virtual therapy because they're not sure what they're getting. These folks are top of the line, well-qualified psychotherapists. So head on over there, give it a free trial and see what you think. BetterHelp.com/Mark and enter the promo code Mark. I'd like to thank everybody here at E1, Adrian, Kimberly, Allison, my wonderful editor, Dave Trafford, for bringing all this together and making this show work. I think that's it. So reach out to me. Let me know what you thought on social, and tune in next Monday, for another episode of So-Called Normal. I'm Mark Hennick.